Hello and welcome to Global Accessibility Awareness Day, the famous GAAD. We are here in Atos, France, and my name is John Hicks. I work in the accessibility and digital inclusion fields here with Atos. And we are going to present to you a small conversation about accessibility today with many members of our international team. So we have people these days in the USA, in Germany, in Spain, and many other countries, including the UK. Today I have three lovely guests with me. Emma Urquhart from Scotland, Julia Undeutsch, who is in Vienna, Austria, and here next to me is Alexander Arnaud from Paris. Conversations about accessibility are quite frequent. And it seems like yesterday, but it was actually a year ago that we were already here talking about this with other guests. We've considered that these conversations are happening more and more often, but we're not sure that the message is getting through. So one of the things that we're going to do differently today is we're going to use a certain model of change and transformation to case our conversation in different terms. So I'm looking at now the Three Horizons model, which is being used by the University of the Third Horizon in Scotland and in other places. In this model, we are very interested in how to get from where we are now to where we want to be. And where we want to be, obviously, is in this inclusive and equitable society that we've all heard so much about. Where we are now is in a situation which isn't quite there, but we can see pockets of this happening right now. So the first horizon is business as it is, and we see certain things which are no longer working. The third horizon is where we would like to be. And then this second horizon, which comes between the two of them, are actually the entrepreneurial acts and innovation that get us from H1 to H3. And that's where we think accessibility, digital accessibility, is poised at the moment. It's an innovative and entrepreneurial business. So it's pro-business and it's pro-change. And we're going to case our conversation in this way. I just want to mention two books. There's Bill Sharp's book, The Three Horizons, The Patterning of Hope, which kicked this all off in 2013, released by International Futures Forum. And then recently in France, Sylvie Domal and 58 Tools for Systemic Design, which is a very good collection of different tools. And conspicuously, the Three Horizons model is featured on chapter 42. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to my guests and let them present themselves. And then we're going to get right into the conversation on this Global Accessibility Awareness Day here at Atos. Take it away, if you would, Emma.
Good morning, good morning. I'm Emma. I work for Atos up in Scotland. I've been in the industry for 15 years, so I've seen a huge amount of change in it. At the beginning, when I started work with accessibility, I didn't think that I was directly part of the community. And through the 15 years, I've also been discovering that I'm very much neurodiverse and disabled myself. So seeing changes myself in the industry and really looking forward to trying to drive it going forward and actually make the change happen that I would like to see.
Thank you. And we have in Vienna, Julia.
I'm Julia. I'm from Atos Vienna, and I'm a self-taught front-end developer and accessibility advocate. I try to talk about accessibility at any given chance, such as at work, at university or meetups, to spread awareness. My background is actually quite different. I studied musicology and Japanese studies at the University of Vienna while working in a casino as a poker dealer. But when I started learning how to code in 2020, accessibility kept popping up, and I quickly realized that this was an important topic I wanted to focus on. And here I am. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Julia. Alexander.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alexandre from Paris. I'm an accessibility specialist, and before that, I'm a low vision person since my birth and colorblind. I work as in the inclusion space since 2015, and I reported my first accessibility issues and raised it in 2010. And I train hundreds of elderly, visually impaired, blind people to learn how to use their computer. I learn deeply what is the user experience, what are the challenges, and I fight a lot in the open source ecosystem to make accessibility a concern, for example, in LibreOffice and many other software. And nowadays at Atos, I'm doing accessibility consulting for many customers. What I really love is reporting issues and help the customer and use on people understanding what are the issues, what are the user needs, and to truly understand the subject of accessibility. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you all so much for coming to this occasion. So we're going to talk about this subject, like I said, in the framework of the 3 horizons. One thing that's very important, because people often say, oh, we need transformation, we need to change. There's a lot of things in Horizon 1 that we need to keep. And we don't want all the lights to go off. So this is the real challenge for these kinds of transformations. We're going to begin with Horizon 1. Let's look at what is it about the situation currently in business and in other areas, for example, administration areas, that's really the problem. I've been working in the field in France for 20 years now. I do know that conversations about accessibility have been increasing in frequency, but progress is still quite slow. So here's the situation we are now, business as usual at the moment. Alexander, I'm going to come right back to you because you very much stated your position there. What's your view of accessibility today as the state of the art and as a business proposition? How is it being treated by most companies and most other organizations?
To prepare to answer this question, I read some survey and studies on the subject and asked some of my friends about the topic. And what a true feeling I have is currently we made progress in, as you said, in 20 years in the field of accessibility. It's more spread, but we are still at a low level of accessibility. If in France we are looking at the most 200 administration process, they are today still not accessible.
That's the survey by Julie. Is that?
Yeah. It was a
Julie Moina?
Jolie Moina, yeah. Take the state report, analyzes it, and check where we are. And we can take American survey and many others, but we are still at a low level. And as a disabled person, for example, if I go to a grocery store, I have many challenges to face, for example, to find products. If I go to a store to find a cooker or to find a washing machine, it's very hard to find one accessible. And on the field of digital application and website, and it's very rare the number of fully, totally compliant, which are conform to the laws and the norms, the standards, but also very usable. So we are currently still at the low level, and we have to progress a lot to have a truly and fully inclusive world.
Thank you. So there are obviously some habits and practices that need to be changed in order that we don't have to consider these things with such difficulty in the near future. Julia, I was going to turn to you with this question. So you said you've gone through a lot of different situations in your professional life. In your eyes, what are some of the practices, the current practices of business and development that are almost militating against the success of accessibility? Have you got any ideas to enlighten us on that
Sure.
question?
Basically, as I perceive it, and also heard from friends working in the same industry, companies often lack awareness about accessibility. They often see accessibility only as an additional expense of time and money without seeing anyone benefiting from it. What underlies a misconception is the belief that people with disabilities do not use the web, or that those very people would not be interested in the product you're trying to sell. And there is a lack of understanding that web accessibility are often not used exactly because they are not accessible, and the user has no way to interact with them. And this understanding cannot be extended in the companies because hardly any people with disabilities are hired or accessibility specialists involved in the development process. And in development teams, I think it is often not properly communicated how accessibility is included in the project. So no one really feels responsible. And in bigger IT companies and services here in Austria, for example, it is possible that developers are bought in. And so there is the possibility that the own company values may not flow into the project. If there is no in-house employee who is familiar with accessibility, for example, the result is often blindly trusted. And there are also projects where designers, developers, and testers from different companies have to work together. And I think this makes it difficult to find a common ground when these companies have different values, or if only a part of the team is familiar with accessibility, and thus the responsibility and certain tasks are not equally distributed. As a result, developer experience can suffer due to poor code quality, a lack of interest in accessibility, or a "I don't have to" attitude, and thus more work or unnecessary work for others. So I think that accessibility needs to be taken into account already during the planning phase and incorporated into every aspect. And if team members are not familiar enough with the topic, an accessibility specialist should be brought in.
Thank you. Yes. So, I mean, from what you're saying, we really get the idea that there's nobody who's actually said we won't do accessibility. It's all about accountability, and somehow this question just falls through the hole in the middle. And I think that is often to do with what are perceived as business constraints, and in particular the constraints on time. And that's why it's very interesting to use this Horizons model, because it deals precisely with time. In other words, what's the cost of doing something at the right time? What's the cost of not doing something at the right time? What's the cost of repairing things in the future? Emma, I'm going to turn to you and ask you if you have any interesting details or ideas about this aspect. So we are always constrained by time, obviously. Time is money. How does that affect accessibility in this way, that we are missing the call and somehow missing out?
So before I was an accessibility specialist, I was a web developer and then a tester, pulling websites apart and putting them back together. And one of the big methodologies there that I personally am a big fan of is called Agile. It's very much based on common sense and the lived experience of the people developing these products, which I find makes it a lot easier to swallow than a lot of other methodologies. And something that is throughout the Agile methodology is that it is so much cheaper and quicker and just more pleasant overall to build something in from the start of a project rather than trying to retroactively fit it in or fix it when the product's nearly done. And that absolutely applies to accessibility. If you get people involved from step zero, if you get everyone engaged and thinking about accessibility from the very beginning, it's going to be a much more pleasant experience and a much cheaper experience for the business and quicker experience for the team to work accessibility into that product.
Okay, but do you think that the constraints on time, that treat time as this very limited resource, can be addressed in the Agile process?
Absolutely. And one of the key things about accessibility is that it doesn't need to be perfect. A lot of teams struggle with coming in late and worrying that they need to get everything perfect from the start. Whereas a weaker attempt at putting in accessibility is better than no attempt at all. So even if you're coming in late, even if you're short on time, a little bit of time put into accessibility will be a lot better than just trying to brush it under the rug or not think about it at all.
Thank you so much. So that's really, I think, a key is that there is an importance to this, which is already being treated, but often gets left behind in this idea that, well, we don't have time to do it now. In France, there's a very famous expression, le lot deux, or we'll do accessibility in the second phase of the project, which is always the death knell for accessibility, in the sense that if you release something thinking, well, we'll do that in the next phase, it can be quite catastrophic. So moving on from that, we have this first horizon where we have a lot of things already there that we'd like to keep. Agile technologies, agile processes, very important, and we can use them to put in accessibility. So one of the things that someone has been working on here in Atos is the DevAxOps idea of the agile process. We won't talk about that today, but it's an interesting way of integrating accessibility into the agile process so that it's actually tested in the same iterations as everything else. Moving on to where we're going. So we have this first horizon where some things we need to keep, some things we probably need to let go of, mostly ignorance and lack of accountability, for example, when it comes to accessibility. And where are we going with this? Well, we have this vision, and every major company in the world is now putting this on the front page of their website about inclusion and equity and fairness. Well, there's a lot of marketing talk, but is it really happening? And what's the point of it? Well, obviously, for a society that works well, there are a lot of these inequalities, well, all of them, which need to be addressed. And so we're working towards this idea of an equitable and inclusive society. And it's an important part of our long-term vision. What else is there in this third horizon that we're looking at in the distance, which can inspire us? And in particular, I'd like to come back to you, Julia, in the first instance. What can we say about our organizations, companies, government organizations, other kinds of organizations, that will be different in this future, hopefully not too distant future?
From a front-end developer's point of view, the goal should be to write the best code as possible. This automatically means using semantic HTML, which leads to more accessible web applications. And you should want to keep up to date with the latest technology, learn new things, improve yourself. Technology is evolving very fast, and so should you as a developer and as an organization to make the most of it. I would like to share a personal experience. The Google Lighthouse extension, for example, makes it very easy for developers to overcome the first hurdles in terms of performance, SEO, and accessibility. And when I first started learning to code 3 years ago, it was the minimum in the tech community for every developer to get 100% in all of these areas on your side project. And everyone wanted to achieve this and were motivated to do everything to get there. And they often miss this attitude and motivation in professional teams. And as for companies, when hiring, the recruiter should pay attention to how the front-end code was written. It's okay if it isn't written perfectly, you're constantly learning. But the most important thing is that new employees want to improve and learn. And no one should be hired who thinks it doesn't matter how the code was written as long as it works. I personally don't understand why there is no emphasis on code quality with HTML. Good code quality is a prerequisite to ensure good developer experience. This helps not only beginners or developers who for some reason find it difficult to read and understand code quickly, but everyone, like new team members and your future self. And in addition, accessibility must be seen as a company value and in an everyday matter. It is as important as data security and ethics, and everyone on the team should have a basic understanding or knows who to turn to if they need help or support. And for this purpose, the company should provide various learning materials in different formats to make getting started as easy as possible. Accessibility should no longer be a discussion, but a requirement for every company and every project. A good start would be the accessibility champion training, like we do have at Atos. And this should be integrated in every company, and it should become one of the mandatory modules, such as data security and ethics for every employee.
Oh, thank you very much, Julia. So I'm getting really this feeling you're looking at the future with these two aspects, the values which are important, and also the details which go along with the values. You can't just have the values if you're not actually going to implement them. Alexander, I want to come to you, because you've had a lot of experience, as you were saying, doing training of people and in different aspects of open office materials. What is it for you that is the ideal vision for tech projects and organizations? What kind of changes do you see are needed for this inclusive future that we're trying to bring about?
First of all, the question many project manager or company leader can ask themselves is, are disabled people or will use my software, my tool, my apps? It's a legitimate question we can have. But if we think just a moment what technology brings to people with disability, it's almost sure they will use your software. For example, if you take people with severe mobility difficulties, they will use online store to bring them stuff to them. If you think of the community I know the most, the visually impaired and blind, GPS and optical character recognition will bring more empowerment and autonomy. And as physical stores are not fully accessible, we benefit a lot from using online grocery stores. So it's obvious if we think of difficulty in the physical world, we need digital, inclusive, accessible world. And one of the problems we have is in the industry, many white and fully able men are leading the industry today and having a vision of society, maybe not the one everyone wants. And what we would like to have, I would like to see in the space is to have full and real universal design, universal user experience, which include everyone, elderly people, disabled people, everyone being part of the reflection of what is a user, what is a persona. And for me, it's very important to shift from designing for oneself, for ourselves, to designing for all. And one of the obvious stuff for that is contrast, a color contrast. We have many people having trouble to read if there is few good color contrast. And why on earth today in 2023 we don't have good contrast? We don't take into account the colorblind 8% of the men in the world. So we need to shift a lot from centric vision to broad vision. It's my hope for the tech industry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of just the other day, I was in a hotel actually, and I couldn't see if the shampoo, I thought it was shampoo, but it was so badly contrasted that actually it was skin cream or something, you know, and if I'd washed my hair with it, it would have been a disaster. Very strange. It was yellow text on white background. Strange things in design. I see this future you're talking about, and of course, design as we were looking at the book by Sylvie Domal a few minutes ago, design is something that's happening a lot now. I mean, people are talking about it, and people are talking about accessibility, and we see these little pockets of the future that are already existing now. So we say, okay, let's dream of a future where universal design is a reality, where everybody takes into account problems of contrast, even when they're writing the label of their shampoo bottle, and where accessibility is taken seriously. So these things exist as part of a future, and they're existing already. And I think we could probably agree, at least amongst us, that now is the right time for them to be existing more and more. Emma, coming back to you, in your experience working as a developer and also now in your experience in the accessibility field, what is it about this right moment, the right time to do something? In the sense also of cost, because often we might put something off thinking, well, we'll just do it later. There can be ramifications for that, can't there?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest ramifications that we see is if accessibility is being brought in last minute, if it wasn't a known part of the contract and everyone's rushing to meet that in the contract, or if the development team weren't aware that they needed to develop accessibly and they're only just now learning about it, is we see a lot of negativity, frustration, and it means the accessibility specialists coming in are coming into quite a charged and angry environment. And that has a particularly big impact because the accessibility field has a lot of people with disabilities and neurodiversities. And instead of just advocating for a product or advocating for a commercial aspect, you end up having to advocate for why you matter, why this minority group is important to be supported. And that can be exhausting to have to constantly justify yourself in monetary terms. I see a lot of neurodiverse and disabled colleagues really burnt out on this. We're losing very talented people because the day-to-day drain of having to constantly promote yourself as a commercial item and convince businesses that you are worth spending money on, it's just really draining for a person who just wants to live a normal life and be treated with respect and dignity. It's just so tiring. And we really want to try and avoid putting that strain on a minority group. We never want the minority staff to be taking the weight of that on their own shoulders. And bringing accessibility into the conversation from the start, having that education in place, having that empathy and understanding really helps with creating that positive environment for everyone.
Great, nice description there of this positive environment that we're all hoping to arrive to. I'm going to stay with you, Emma, actually, because you've kind of answered the next question. So we've just been talking about this future horizon where we're going to be in a different value system, or a realized value system at least, where these things you've just spoken about will be a fact of the matter. And let's talk about this horizon 2, which is how we get there. And sticking with you, I'm going to give you just a very quick question, and you give me a very quick response. Here, I'm a project manager. You've come along to tell me about accessibility, and I say, no. It's just too big. It's too risky. I don't want to do it. It's too expensive, and I'll have to do all sorts of unit testing afterwards. What's your response?
You've already got customers that have disabilities and neurodiversities. You've already got staff who have disabilities and neurodiversities, or they're going to develop it as they age or as they go through life circumstances. So the cost is already happening. You're going to be losing people, losing customers, losing important members of your team if you don't think about accessibility now.
Thank you. Alexander, coming back to you. Is an inclusive and an accessible world really a practical ambition? Aren't there just too many obstacles?
I think, yes, it is possible, and definitely we can do it, but we need to define what is an accessible world. As there are a broad range of disabilities, if at least for first goal, we meet the standards. For example, in the digital space, the web content accessibility guidelines, it would be a great jump into the right direction. And we have all the technology, all the tools, all the capacity to do it. It's just a matter of taking actions, you know. So we are not in a world where we should create very innovative solutions to solve every problem, but for many of them we have solutions, and we need to put them in place and take concrete and real action for making accessibility a reality. And what of the stuff we could hope to create this accessible world is to just expect to offer the same level of quality, of same level of user experience for the end user. And working on the details is important. And having big picture is good, having plan, roadmap, and maybe the company say we need to make accessible concrete, but we also need to ensure it is a case in the daily life of people, to have their feedback, to, you know, change a way on that. So it's possible, but we need to go deeper and go in the details.
Okay. Yeah. Again, we're coming back to this thing where you need the big picture, but you need the details. The facts have to be on your side. Emma, coming back to you on this, Julia spoke earlier when we were talking about the first horizon, she was talking about agile processes. What are some of the other things that we are already doing which we can harness to help advance accessibility? In whatever way, do you have any ideas of things we might be able to use as stepping stones and/or ways to move forward?
Absolutely. So sometimes in IT, we can fall into the trap of siloed thinking where we're only thinking about accessibility in an IT circumstance, when accessibility is never just its own disconnected thing. Accessibility is healthcare, it's infrastructure, it's the systems we're using, and it's the things that we're doing day to day. And through the pandemic, I think we really saw how important things like healthcare and the ability to work remotely and access company systems and freely move around the internet, how much that matters to people. And that's something I think is really important to keep with us going forward. This idea that it is the big picture for accessibility. We need to be thinking about healthcare. We can't just be thinking about the clients that we're working for. We need to be thinking about the local healthcare systems, local charities and volunteer groups in the area that we could be supporting, and the actual staff on the ground with these needs. And just keeping in mind that it's not a singular aspect. It's very much everything is connected and everything has a knock-on effect. We see a lot with accessibility. If a user is frustrated because a website isn't working for them, that can be just the tip of the iceberg. Like, it's not just that the website isn't working, it's that the website isn't working and they're having trouble buying what they need to do their day-to-day work, or to get jobs, or to get the healthcare access they need. It's all having a knock-on effect, and we can't lose sight of how interconnected all of these elements are.
Brilliant. Yes, I think that's that interconnectivity which really solidifies this connection that we're looking for. So how do we get from A to B? And this question of what is the important thing in this mysterious second horizon, which can get us to where we're going, using some of what we have already, but also leaving some of it behind. I'm going to come to Julia for the next question. where do you think we need to be putting our attention, or focusing the most, to make this a reality, all these things that Emma just spoke about?
Sure. I would say that the most important place where accessibility should be integrated is in education, like the university or subject-specific high schools like we do have here in Austria, and coding boot camps, which are receiving more and more attention alongside traditional education. I haven't seen anything specific or very little in the curriculum related to accessibility in studies like UX design, digital humanities, data science, computer science, media informatics, and such. But not only in these areas, also students should, all the students should learn about accessibility in general, maybe from an early stage. For example, how to create accessible presentations and documents, because this affects almost every student, regardless of the field of study. And here in Austria, for example, every student has free access to Microsoft tools like Word and PowerPoint. So there should be no excuses here. But the offer on how to create accessible documents and the understanding what accessibility actually is missing.
Thank you very much. I can see that this thread we have going through the whole conversation today about the need to see the long term and to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation at the end of a project or at the end of a university degree or at the end of anything where we actually haven't been addressing this subject from the beginning. I think we're probably almost out of time, so we're going to wrap up with a couple of rapid-fire questions. Let's think big now about this future and the present and the midterm. If you could very quickly, Emma first and then Julia, what do you see, what would you like to see in 1 year's time, in 5 years' time, and in 100 years' time? Emma first.
All right, so in the coming year, I want to see us keeping the good habits we've picked up over the pandemic of making work more remotely accessible, keeping that high level of access, understanding that people don't need to be in an office to be doing great work. They can be working well from wherever they're comfortable and wherever they are in the world. In 5 years' time, I'd like to see more understanding of what disabilities are and how they work. And I think we're really going to see that going forward. We're going to see a lot of change in how we understand disabilities and neurodiversities. I see it a lot already in the younger generation, how they talk about themselves in their own minds. And I really look forward to seeing that become more commonplace and seeing everyone be more comfortable digging into how their own minds work and understanding themselves better. And in the coming 10 years, I want to see a better understanding of how it's not just the bubble that you're in, it's everything around you. It's very much about the people and the world around you and not just IT or not just the niche that you're in. It's about how everything connects and ensuring that the community works well together.
Wow, thank you for that beautiful summary. Everything connects. Julia, what about you?
Yeah, so I would like to see that first people care, that accessibility is part of the education, and that it becomes one of the company values and thus part of every job interview. And that DEI is not just a slogan that companies claim to care about, but that they offer on accessible and inclusive work environment where apply and work. And that everyone in the team, no matter which role, try to learn as much as possible about accessibility and pass on their knowledge and constantly integrate it into the development process. And also that the laws become stricter and that so new jobs will be created, which could also lead to more interest or reasons to get into accessibility from the employee's perspective.
Excellent. And in 100 years?
That everything is accessible.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to give the last word here to Alexander. Thank you all for participating in this experiment. Now, usually the Three Horizons stuff, and like I say, you can check out these books. And Sylvie Dumal's book, by the way, is in French, so it's 58 outils systémiques, and Bill Sharp's is in English. But in a real Three Horizons workshop, we would be using Post-its on the board. It would take all morning. So we've had a bit of a rushed touch of this subject through this filter, and it's been quite rapid. But I think it's been interesting to divide the things in this way. Atos, like every other big company, is coming to this subject with an aspiration that we can help the world move on to a level where this is no longer a subject for round tables, because it's in everybody's natural day-to-day. And we think about it in the same way we think about everything like security, et cetera, et cetera. And as Emma said, not just in tech, but in everything. The last word then to my good friend and collaborator, Alex. What is your message, Alex, to the people?
I would like to cite Steve Jobs. He said, the world has been made by people. We are the people, and we create the world we live in. So every one of us can make the world going in the right direction. We have a movement called With the 15, where 15% of the population are concerned by a disability. More than 1 billion people all over the world. Not every one of them are able to fight for their rights, spread the word for themselves, and you, in your own life, in your own way of driving your business, asking for new product, asking for change, can have an impact on inclusion of accessibility. It's not just something reserved for some people. It's something we need to care. Everyone needs to care about it. So I hope we take all of us, we take all our part on the journey. So I hope we, me, John, Emma, and Julia, we can all, with all the world, create the world we deserve and the world we hope. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alexander. Very nice. So thank you, Emma Urquhart in Scotland, Julia Undeutsch in Vienna, Alexander here in the studio, and from me, John, here in Besançon at Atos HQ. We've really enjoyed this conversation. I've had quite a good time, actually. And we hope you have a very good GAAD, Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Spread the word and keep the flame.